Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. It's been a while, but we're back and we have about 3 questions in our Discord. So if you guys do want to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe to our Discord. That link will be down below in the description, and you can go ahead and ask us questions and we'll go ahead and answer them. So yeah, let's just get right into it, Ramses.
Yeah, so the first question we got is a really interesting one. It's about practice. So it reads as follows. It's super important. Practicing something wrong can be very, very bad. This can build up bad habits and muscle memory, which can be very difficult to change over time when you start practicing correctly. Sometimes you need a second person to come in and say, hey, why are you doing it like this? And then nudge you in the right direction. But not everyone has that. So the question is, what would you all suggest for good practice habits? And how would you all suggest to slowly break bad habits? Is there anything specific? Chart in your heads? Is there any specific chart in your heads that details what a good practice is versus bad practice, and how do you all go about identifying bad practice? So essentially, how do you break bad habits? How do you practice well, and how do you differentiate good and bad practice?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For me, well, and shout out to Alto. Alto's been supporting us, our first subscriber, so shout out to Alto. And when I think of this question, I always try to think back when I started competing. So we're gonna have to go way back. I mean, for all of us, I think all of us started around Brawl time, right? So like 08, 09. Now, there was a lot less resources back then. So I kind of envy the newer generation that have a plethora of resources. So you guys have a ton of resources, obviously, just on this channel alone. And then there's a bunch of other amazing content creators out there in Smash that make great guides as well, right? So, Izal makes very good guides for beginners, especially. I think his videos have a ton of views. They're great, especially for beginner players. And also he drops a lot of stuff at the end that are more advanced techniques, kind of similar to how Smash University does it. So consume content, that's number one, in my opinion. And when I was younger, I had the mentality of watching the best player on my character. And especially if I'm starting off, at the end of the day, that's an easy blueprint or it's definitely not an easy blueprint to follow, but it's an easy blueprint to find, right? So it depends on the character as well, right? If you play other obscure characters, it might be a little harder to find people to play that character at a higher top level. And it doesn't even have to be a PGR player, really. I mean, as long as you find someone that you can watch that utilizes the character's toolkit more, then you can just see what they do and try to execute on it, right? So for me, I'm lucky because I guess I'm not lucky. You pick your character, so I pick the top tier. So I have a lot of footage to watch. There's a lot of amazing Fox players out there. And even when Light started doing like sour dash stack into back air, I immediately tried to implement it into my gameplay, right? So stuff, anything like that, where it's like, oh, some new kill confirm dropped, or how does this player, execute corner pressure against X character, this character, and you just have to, it all branches off of game knowledge, and you increase your game knowledge by watching more videos and informing yourself. Why does Light corner pressure Cloud in this specific way, right? Whereas in shorter characters, he has to sink the back airs lower and things like that. So I think the easiest thing to do and the most obvious thing to do is to inform yourself about your character, watch other players that are better at that character, and try to emulate them. And it can be as simple as that to begin with, but do you guys have anything past that? I know that's really, really surface level, but I know especially Tony and Ramses, you guys currently coach in the current meta. So I assume you guys would have insight to go past the entry barrier, right?
Yeah. So I think you're very right, Charles, in that copying others is very, very important. For me, I think there are essentially 2 things that you're doing when you're practicing, right? One is emulating and one is innovating. And I think understanding both of those elements and kind of understanding where you are in terms of what you're doing is very important. And so most of the time, you start off with emulation, because creating something truly new is really something that only the best player or one of the best players in the world will do, right? So think like Leo defining the meta, or now Sonic's defining the meta, that type of level player. So most of the time you'll be emulating. The thing about emulation is that it requires integration as well. So after emulating someone, you have to think, okay, what does it do for me, right? How does it fit into what I want to do? And so that's where you get into kind of like the type of practice where you're like trying to figure out something new. And so for most people, what practice looks like, good practice, is that you start off by finding some sort of idea, finding some sort of new theory. In other words, emulating successes that other people have achieved. And then you try to implement that yourself, right? And so you try to imitate whatever it is that you're trying to learn. And from trying to implement it, you'll learn more about that theory and you'll learn more about what it means to you. And then eventually you try to integrate it. And so all practice really follows these three phases. It's theory, implementation, integration, right? Where theory is understanding, implementation is trying to apply it and trying to get a deeper understanding by understanding how it works in context of a practical match. And then finally, integration is getting to the point where you can actually like do this without having to think about it, without this being like a very conscious and deliberate process. And so as long as you kind of follow these three steps in terms of learning any new skill, I feel like you're practicing well. At the same time, though, because part of your practice is implementation, it is kind of understanding how this element that you haven't implemented into your play so far, it should be implemented into your play. That is new ground. You will not find another player who has the exact same circumstances as you, who does this thing, and then you can like copy it one-to-one. There will always be something that makes you unique. A difference in skill set that you have, a difference in reaction time, a different character, different, like there's a lot of things that make you you. And so there will always be some degree of innovation. And that is where you can learn something incorrectly. You can be practicing something and you can miss the mark, or it's something that was important but you just didn't understand it, right? And so this implementation phase is where you can make mistakes. The thing is, if you learn something wrong, that is not bad practice. And so what a lot of people mistake is that they're like, okay, well, I learned corner pressure, but I still suck at corner pressure, and so I practice it wrong. That's not true. A lot of the times, finding these negative results where something doesn't go the way you want it is part of good practice. And so putting in that effort and understanding the outcome, whether the outcome is good or bad, that is the good practice. And so to me, the only way, like the real bad practice that I see is when people are kind of not following this structure of theory, implementation, integration. So they try to, they understand the theory, but they don't try to implement it, or they implement something, but they never integrate it, or they jump from the theory to trying to integrate it without getting that deeper level of understanding. And so bad practice to me is more about not being consistent in the way you learn something, not being thorough in the way you learn something. And so that's also, as an aside, I think that's also why coaches are so important, because what coaches will do is they will teach you how to learn a skill, right? Kind of like a more in-depth of the TLDR I just gave you. And they can point you into what skills would be the most efficient for you to learn. Because more often than not, for most skills, you'll have some degree of theory. And for a lot of things that are relevant, you'll have some degree of implementation, right? And so they can point to a certain skill and say, hey, you need to work on your theory there. Or to a skill and say, hey, you need to implement it better. Or say, hey, I feel like you've implemented this, but you're not consistent in it. Why is it? And then you'll be like, okay, well, I know how to do it, but it takes a lot of effort for me to do it. Okay, let's work on integrating that, right? And also, they can point you towards specific ways to learn theory, specific ways to implement, specific ways to integrate. And so, bad practice often kind of comes down to not applying these steps correctly. That is my personal interpretation. I think there's a lot of ways that you can practice. I don't think the system that I outline in theory, implementation, integration is the only system, but it is what I found to be the most consistent system. I think everyone that I've taught it to, it works for. And something that I also think is that it's one of the more efficient systems that I've personally found. And like Alto said in his question, right? Sometimes you just need someone to come in and say, hey, why are you doing it the way you're doing it? Right? And just look at, okay, is your theory wrong? Are you missing some context in your implementation, or is this not integrated yet? And so in terms of good practice habits, what I recommend is to spend time managing what you're learning. And this is something that I feel like I come back to a lot, is I think if you want to make it big in any skill, use note-taking, because our brains are really like limited in the information you can retain. So having some sort of system where you write down, okay, this is a skill I want to learn. This is the reason I want to learn it. This is where I'm at. Am I trying to understand the theory? Am I trying to implement it better? Am I trying to integrate it into my play? And really keeping track of that, I think, really helps optimize it. And so a good habit would be to take some time every day that you're practicing to manage what you're practicing, to keep up with what you're learning, right? So if you're in the theory stage, write down, what did you learn about the theory behind this? What is your understanding of what you're doing? When you're implementing, write down, where did your theory go wrong? What did you learn in terms of nuance? What is some important context that you didn't know before? The more of these things you can write down, the better. And you don't even need to write it down because you won't remember, or you don't need to write it down because, I'm asking you to write it down, right? The reason you write it down is so that you don't have to keep it in your mind, right? It reduces the mental stack, the mental load, and that gives you more room to focus on what you're doing while you're practicing, and requires you to spend less mental energy on tracking everything that you should be practicing. So that is the chart in my head in terms of good practice. What do you think, Tony?
So I actually had this this question come up to me recently from a different player, just messaging me on Twitter, I believe it was. And so generally, in my perspective, whenever I'm looking at somebody's practice, I have a concept for emulation just from having seen a player of that character beforehand. But that is because I already am entering the situation with a very large base of knowledge, because I personally have thousands of hours of directly studying sets of top players. I'm going to have a better existing mental framework of what play is supposed to look like, what the average top player at this and that level are going to look like when they're playing. And then I'm going to just compare that with yours and then kind of picture how to get from step B to step A in this case. So once I've established what I want, or rather what you want and what that means to me in my mind, I'm then going to ask, well, how can I get it from your position? Because I've seen so many players also work from theirs. Because again, I have a pre-existing experience of having seen so many different players reach that point from where most people are asking the question. So when a player is asking me, hey, how do I get from where I'm at to where they're at? I just recall back to prior experience of having seen similar people with similar issues successfully travel that path. And so I can just reference prior successful examples. However, for the people watching at home, you probably don't have that experience to reference on. So how can you recognize when that is not working for you? And again, it comes back to that basic question of what do I want and how am I going to get it? So what we then want to do is we want to take what do we want, and then we can look at other examples to see if there are possible examples to emulate by looking. And this is where looking at other or top player VODs comes into handy, because you can just look at what they're doing, see, is that working? Okay, I'll do that. And you don't even necessarily have to understand why it's working. This is called black boxing. You just go ahead, you do what works, whether you understand why or not. Your understanding can come in hindsight, and then you can also start learning why it doesn't work as you experience it more. But first, start off by just doing what works. Monkey see, monkey do. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And trying to overcomplicate it from there usually is going to have a loss of efficiency in arriving there. It's going to have a loss in efficacy usually, because you are spending time thinking about some question of the universe instead of just practicing. So now with that said, another step to keep in mind is, so you see MKLeo going for Joker forward air 1 to up smash, and you keep going for the same thing and it's not working out for you. Well, our first step is it not working out for you because of execution, because you are connecting the forward air 1 and then not always getting the up smash follow-up? In that case, what you want to do is you want to ask, well, how did MKLeo originally learn to forward air 1 to up smash? So from there, we're going to go ahead and take a step back. We're going to actually either look at MKLeo's original VODs with Joker and see how he learned up there, or because you live in the future from where Leo was, you can go ahead and check things like character discords and such and just ask questions. Hey, my forward air 1 to up smashes don't work. Post and preferably a replay or some other footage of you trying and failing. so that then people can then tell you why it's not working, even if it's in the form of something rude like, oh yeah, you suck, this is why. Like, just take it on the chin, go forward. You don't care, you got the information you wanted, so now you know how to get what you want. From there, it's just a matter of the implementation, as he said, and you're going to go there. Now, I will also specifically point out one of the most common mistakes that I see lower toward the mid-level, with that being defined as people who don't cache their locals versus people who do, is that they try to innovate. You might be that person who just sees the game different from the start and just practices and just has growth that takes them all the way to the top. There are examples of players who do that. You are probably not one of them. It's not that you're not a valuable person. It's that for most people, that is not a successful approach. I've seen a lot more players fail at being special than succeed at it, than I've seen players who even achieve mediocrity trying to imitate someone else. And it's not that imitating someone else is more likely to make you mediocre. It's that instead of trying to slow your roll, grow your roll. Go ahead and fit into the shoes of the better player that you want to be. Decide how you like the fit of those shoes. And then from there, once you've actually taken some steps there, decide, oh, well, this dimension needs to be different. I don't like this position when I'm playing like this. This makes me uncomfortable. And then you've established problems that you can target, and then either study VODs of players who play differently than them and will play those situations differently, experiment with that way, or this is where innovation will actually come up, but only after you've actually grown into that role in the first place. You want to emulate successfully before you start trying to innovate, because you don't have a framework to work on to innovate. Now, an exception to this would be, like, let's say you're a top player coming in from another game and you just think everybody's playing Smash wrong. By all means, I encourage you, as a big fan of Smash, show us your vision of the art, show us what you can do. But if you're just coming in here, you've got middling success in other FGC games, and you just think that because you know how to enter a Hadouken that you're going to be God's gift to the game, you are probably not that twinkling special star. Go ahead and just emulate what is already working and do it consistently. And then when you're doing it consistently, then you will have something to build from. Bam, you've seen this.
I think.
In all
Can I
kinds
jump?
of... Go ahead, Ramses.
Can I jump in real quick? I think this is a very interesting topic because I get a lot of students who are exactly like this. And
some
what I
spicy
found
students, huh? Some spicy students. They got
yeah,
the innovation
I am,
right off the spice rack. Like, yo, check out this forward air tech though.
Yo, we got the
Ramses, I know all the other top strokes do this, but yo, what if I go
stylish.
Buster
I do
here
that.
instead?
I got a banjo student like a year ago. Shout out to them, who was like, I can just like get a stock lead and then like timer stall with like my infinite grenade recovery. And I was like, okay, well, like, do they have what is their counterplay? We went through everything, and their theory seemed okay, and I was like, okay, try it out. And then like they tried it out and it sucked ass. And like shout out to them, because like they thought about it and then they tried it out, and then they figured out, hey, I tried to implement this. Turns out there was an element of it that I didn't see coming, and it doesn't work. And like that's how you learn, right?
Was the element just being good at the game and getting the first stock? Because you have to get the first stock to do this strategy. So you gotta.
You're doing it with banjo.
Getting the first stock with banjo is pretty hard.
Getting ahead, and then also, and then also it takes a while to set up because you have to go all the way into the blast zone, and then the grenades have to start going up. And so I was like, well, I mean, maybe you can do it on respawn, but then like you need to get like a star KO. Like it's a circumstantial thing. Anyway, kind of getting back into the meat and potatoes. I think the only innovation you need is, as I said, like trying to figure out how whatever it is that you're trying to emulate works into your game plan. But if your goal at the game is to have fun, and the way you have fun is by doing something weird, then by all means do something weird. What I recommend is to play a character that's weird. So if you want to be the guy who innovates, play Pac-Man, play Steve, right? Play a character that has like a million setups and do weird stuff. If you like doing weird stuff, that's fine. But pick a character that works with it. If you play Roy, don't be the Roy like my Roy specialty is that I use weak hit up tilt to get tech chases. Like, bro, no one is waiting for weak hit up tilt tech chases. So be
What's the sauce?
That is the sauce.
That actually does sound saucy.
And it does connect because your opponent's probably not avoiding it.
Listen, you guys are ruining my monologue here. No. So just be concrete about what you're trying to achieve. So like as Tony said, if you're trying to be the best, you probably don't want to innovate. The way I think about it is like you need to know the rules to be able to break them in a way that makes sense. And you don't know the rules yet. If you're not a top 20 player in the world, you probably don't know the rules yet. And so what I find is that most people that try to innovate, they think they know the rules and they think that is their problem, and so they innovate. But if you go 2-2, you don't know the rules yet. And so the problem is probably that you need to deepen the understanding that you have of fundies, of the standard rules.
Dunning-Kruger.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there's an argument to be made that using Dunning-Kruger that way is Dunning-Kruger, but we're not going to get into that. Anyway, point is, almost every single person that I see to try to innovate does it because they feel like that is the only way to improve. And I'm here to tell you, you probably want to work on your fundies. Now, bam, as Tony said, you have a lot of experience in competitive endeavors. Tell us a little bit about.
I said, what are fundies?
What are fundies? Yeah. Exactly. No, but Ben, tell us a little bit about what you think about the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you guys scored on a ton of huge touch points. I think the biggest ones, like you talked about, learning that you should always be assessing and evaluating your own practice, right?
Yep.
That's a really, really big one. I think sometimes people are like they got it down. I'm like, all right, I'm going to learn, say, we're talking about Roy, right? I'm going to learn jab back air, right? And that's what I'm going to do. That's my thing. I'm practicing that, and I'm going to keep doing that, the end, right? And that's just like how it goes. And they're not realizing like every session is an opportunity to learn even more, right? It's not just like, oh, one day you magically get jab back air, right? Because you may find out, oh, maybe you learn jab back air, but maybe there's a better way to do jab back air. Maybe you're realizing that like the reason why you're not getting it as consistently, maybe you should do another way, right? And maybe you're having problems here on left and right. I notice I'm doing it a lot better on the right side than the left side, right? So I need to write that down so I can need to start to focus. How do I get myself better on the right side so then I can be more complete, right? So I don't have it only kill confirm on one side and then I have to, otherwise I'm screwed, Like these are the little things you want to start thinking about. And I think a lot of times people go away from that, right? Like you talked about like in practice, right? People talk about practice makes perfect. It's like, no, but there's like, there's a way to practice and improve on practice. And that whole process is really how you get there, right? I know I've talked about this quite a bit of times, but like for example, like some medalists like Jill Kittner, who I had the privilege of meeting during my time at Red Bull. I saw her whole pamphlet, like her whole, like she has like all these huge notebooks on notebooks and notebooks, and every day she has her personal best times, how she was riding here, how the stretches went, how the the conversations with the coaches, right? Just like everything you could ever dream of, to the point where she has the notebook, and then on top of that, she has little sticky notes to put on top of those things if there's other stuff that she reflects on, and like, oh yeah, this also is something that came from this moment that now I realize in hindsight, right? And that's the idea. The constant idea is like every single time, every single one of those moments can be a new discovery of yourself on how you learn and what to implement, right? And so that's going to be a really big thing. Active feedback on people, right? Like talking to your contemporaries, right? That's why it's great to have a coach, right? Not even just on, like, even on the basic level, like ideally, you're going to have a coach who has a better eye and has a better understanding of these processes, right? Just the same as any kind of teacher or mentor in life, right? Someone who's going to have that kind of eye to see these things can tell you kind of this is how the process goes, so you can implement this stuff. It's like that stuff is going to help you, right? This alone, having a decent like additional perspective is going to be good, let alone an experienced one. I think breaking things down in pieces, right? Something that for me personally, growing up in learning piano at an early age, also one of the big things. If you're going to be learning a piece, right, you break these things down. How do you break down a chord? How do you break down this section, right? And that stuff is such a good tool for anything in life, right? You see something, right? Just the same if someone wants to write a book, right? If you just go into it and you're like, I'm going to write a book, I'm just going to start writing a book, you're going to fail. 10,000% you are going to fail. Right? It's something where it's like you got to think about the chapter. You got to think about how can I finish that paragraph, finish that page. Those one page turns into 10, 10 turns into 100, right? You have to look at it that way. Like, how can you take things, break them down, right? And so they're more palpable to the mind so you can take in and then move from there, right? Those are going to be really, really important when like tools for you and different like in perspectives when you were actually looking at like how am I going to practice and how am I going to learn, right? And then I would say probably the last thing, again, I know we all touched on it, Ramses, you especially like touched on it as well too, like Tony, like talk about the innovation, right? Yeah, a lot of people, everyone wants to feel like they are the great genius of this generation. Everyone wants to feel like, oh, you know what? I am Leonardo. Oh, look at this. Look how I'm painting on this tapestry. Incredible. I found this new tech. Lo and behold, right? Yeah, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be that person, right? It's definitely even more than that. And so it's okay to learn first, learn the premise of what you're looking at, right? And understand the hubris in that too. I think that's something that's helped me as well. And like over time is like, and I would like to say that there's a lot of things that I have found for different games, right? So coming from someone like I've found tech, I have literally taught people different things too. But like even then, like there'll be things and it's like, oh, dude, I wasn't even on the ball because I had to get to a certain level, right? Technically and better understanding of the game and watch those around me, my contemporaries, before I can even find something that makes sense. Because you could even find something. The funniest thing, right, to me is sometimes I see some people who actually technically do innovate and they're like a lower level, but like because they don't even know what they have their hands on because they're so bad at the game, they don't even understand why that thing would be important. So it's like they may be doing something that might be incredible, but it's like it's not even being used right. It probably phases out of their game plan anyways as they grow and whatever, right? So that's a whole even other thing. Like even if you do find something, you're probably not even understand the value of it at all, right? And that's the point, and that's a huge thing in life too. There's so many times where I always tell people there's so much information in the world out there, but if you don't have the eye for it, it does not matter, right? There's so many things that can tell a grand story, depending on your expertise. And for someone else, it's nothing. It might as well be pitch black. There might as well be nothing for me to see. And so learn what the game is. Learn the whole system as it is first. Once you learn that, once you understand the win conditions, then you can start to look for innovations that are in accordance to those win conditions. And then you're going to have something that is actually valuable. If you don't even know what those are, then you're just sitting around, spinning around, like making stuff that's nonsense, right? You're going to sit around and be like, oh yeah, dude, I'm crafting this thing. And I call this the Lapafil. And then someone's going to be like, oh yeah, that's a wheel. We've had a wheel for years. Yes, for centuries. We have wheels. Thanks. Good job. Right? Like,
a little late.
Yeah, a little late, buddy. Like that's not going to help anyone. It's definitely not going to help you. It's going to be a waste of time, right? So, and everything we see in this world, right? We build on the shoulders of giants. And the reason why the statement is real, because like the history, there's things that we can take from that. Build off that. That's what you need to build off first before you can get to the next stage, before you can even start to ideate about something that would actually be some kind of innovation. But yeah, I think beyond that, consistency is key. Making sure that you have a consistent schedule in that. I have ADHD, so that's something that's always hard for me for things too, right? But you got to find a way, whatever it may be, to whether it is people in your life who can help, whether it's alarms. Like these days we have so much technology, right? They can allow you to set up things for yourself that can kind of be those consistent reminders so you can still put in the work necessary to improve and grow. So take note of those things if need be. again, especially for people similar to me with that attention deficit, this age is probably one of the best ages for us ever with with the technology that we have right now. I say that now, but the next generation will probably be the same too. But yeah, make sure to take those things into account so you can have that structure, because having that structure is very, very, very important for your overall growth in anything. But yeah.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, consistency is the value that's most important in any practice routine. If you can sit down and play for 8 hours a day, I'm not particularly that interested. If you can practice for an hour a day, go for it. Like, that actually sounds like something that you're going to sustain if you think that you can do that, and then do it consistently. But if somebody tells me they play for 8 hours a day, I already know their ass is about to start playing 0 hours a day. It's just gonna start alternating and eventually just kind of wiggle up and down until it eventually reaches some low practice time, and it's going to be so inconsistent, so they're just going to be getting diminishing returns, or they're not going to ramp all the way up. So that actually brings me to a part of the question that I actually forgot to answer, which is another common thing that I see in bad practice specifically is junk volume. If you are doing things that don't take you closer to your goals, if they are in themselves goals, then that's great. Like, if you are messing around and you just want to do cool animations with banjo, that's fine. Like, go for it. But if you're telling me,
don't hate on my banjo student. Come
that's
on, man.
crazy.
Why it's gotta be him?
We're not.
The shade is real.
That's insane, Tony. Holy moly! I hope he's not listening.
So. I'm not targeting him in particular. I'm just saying, like, if you think that something is interesting or stylish, go for it. But that's its own goal. If you are saying, I'm sitting down here because I'm going to consistently get my down B pulls toward the left, then that is what you are sitting down for. But if you are sitting down, you're doing it once and saying success, and then standing up and walking away, even if you do that consistently, that is not sufficient practice. So it's not as simple as you have to practice. There is a threshold for you must practice this much in order to achieve a repetition, so that you're actually forming some sort of pattern for you to perceive it. And I actually, unfortunately, don't know what the sufficient threshold for this is, or minimum threshold for this is. I don't know that there's enough research on the topic, unfortunately, for us to answer that, but I do believe there is a minimum amount of times that you can practice things like that in a training routine, and that you are not usually punished for practicing more than that until you reach a certain level, and then all of a sudden the rewards you get for practicing something are going to become diminishing, and then it's a matter of, well, how much diminishing returns am I willing to take before this becomes junk volume as well, and then I'm just wasting my time because I'm playing the game for 8 hours a day. And once you practice the 1/1,000,000th forward tilt on the same session, there was a point where your body stopped actually referencing it and trying to commit it to memory, and just turned it into something closer to being a physical tick. So at this point, you're not really being helpful, and you've already capped out, but you're spending all that time, which means that because you spent all that time, that's time that you don't have for other parts of your life, which might seem fine if you just say, oh, Smash is everything to me, and that's fine. But even if you are calling yourself a professional Smash player and you're saying, I do this is my thing, it is still important for you to manage your time effectively and not just be spending your entire day practicing, because that eventually is going to accumulate mental and sometimes physical fatigue, depending on how difficult your character is. And you just can't do that 7 days a week, 7 hours a day for like 7 months in a row. Something is going to break. Man. You can hurt yourself, strain something. It doesn't matter. But the point is that you should be recovering. You should make sure that there's other parts in your life. There's other things that you can do to take care of yourself, which of course we've discussed before here. But the point is that even if you are professionally practicing for hours a day, there are other things you can do to work toward your goals with that time. So what you want to do is you want to establish that minimum effective time, and then somewhere between that and that maximum threshold. So again, like an hour a day is usually where I max out. But honestly, even if somebody can do in 15 minutes a day, preferably if you can do that twice a day, you're golden. That's fantastic. I think people tend to overestimate how much time is necessary in order to hit that minimum. Usually people measure their time in hours, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like a few hours a week, even, I would say, is usually enough for you to see enough improvement for you to see differences in results on like a local level and such. And so just putting that in with targeted practice. Now, if you're just going in and you're messing around in training mode and just kind of doing things that look silly, that's not necessarily training time. There will be points within that time that you do improve and get improvements, but it's not distilled, it's not focused. And so usually what you're going to see is that people just kind of go in and just do stuff and try and figure things out. And again, that can be its own productivity. That's where we get some pretty valuable, like for example, Waidu. I think for the most part, a lot of his innovations that he discovers when in training mode are actually from him just doing silly things and messing around, not necessarily practicing for the sake of winning a tournament. So I just wanted to go ahead and point that out.
So real quick, I do have a student, or I had a student that would practice 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, but would also do weekends as well. But I don't recommend that schedule. Like Tony said, it's not really realistic. The one player that I did have do that was Void, and even when I compare, like when other people ask me like, oh yeah, you coach Void, you know, he was like a local ranked Hawaii player into a top 10 player. How did he do it? I tell people how he did it, and I'm like, 99% of people cannot execute the plan that Void executed, right? Like he just got out of high school. He was super serious about the game. He's a very hard worker. He's very humble. He's also very talented. His ability to learn is remarkable. So I don't know if there, and also since he just got out of high school, he got a lot of time. So there's a lot of other people that hit those other 4 check marks, right? But did you just get out of high school and you can play Smash 8 hours a day, 7 days a week? Probably not.
I remember we did an episode with him, and I asked him, and he said, "Yeah, I played 60 hours a week back then."
Yes.
And then I remember asking him, what made that sustainable for you? And he was just like, "Yeah, like I was just like so down about life, like I needed something to pick me up." And so it's not fun to be in a position where you have to play this game for 60 hours a week. Let me put it that way. Like you need to have a huge motivator to be able to do that.
1000%.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, it worked out for him. But again, I never recommend that training regimen to anyone. And even, yeah, it's like, because there was points where Void was living with me, and I would literally wake up. He would wake up the same time as me, or a little later. He would start doing like the perfect pivot training, because I mean back then, see, it's weird too, because everything we're saying now is kind of the opposite of what me and Void did. Me and Void were like 2 guys in Hawaii that would watch everyone play, and we're like, so suboptimal. Like what is this? Like they could be getting damage extensions there. We didn't know I guess like the real world of tournaments, like, oh, everyone's playing because it's tournament, they're nervous, right? And we experienced on a local level, but we never went out to a major, right, on, you know, mainland US. So when we did first do that and started gaining that experience, that's where Void had like all the technicality, because a lot of our training regiment was focused in training mode. When we went to Apex 2015, it was like, oh, okay, so we're going to take, everyone thinks that perfect pivot's trash, because everyone on Twitter, like someone, it was My Smash Corner, I think, that came out with the perfect pivot video. All the pros are like, yeah, I don't know if this is good. Like, you get combo extensions, but it's not realistic, yada, yada, yada. And then when me and Void went into training mode, I was like, I don't know, it's definitely not easy, but it's definitely possible to do, right? It's definitely possible to do in matches, and that was like the secret weapon, so to speak. And I don't know if there's a lot of quote unquote secret weapons in Ultimate where it's like, oh, I'm gonna come in with ledge slip and no one's gonna know. Like Void was literally comboing people to like 80% plus, and they literally didn't know what was going on. Like it's, you know, they probably saw some troll like perfect pivot video, but they didn't really take it seriously, so they don't really know what's happening when the Sheik is hitting them once and taking them to 70, 80, or like doing all these crazy kill confirms. But again, Void was a very specific scenario, and I would never suggest that. And that was like also a totally different game. This is Smash 4, by the way. So again, the secret weapons, like, they don't exist in Ultimate. There's no secret weapon tech unless you're Peach or Diddy or Mega Man. Like, there's certain characters that have that, and you can gravitate towards that. But I feel like what Tony said, I really want to elaborate on this point of watch, like, the monkey see, monkey do. When you see a top player do something, even if you think that strategy shouldn't be working, you need to understand that strategy. If you play Fox, you need to know how to nair and why you're nairing, right? Like, you need to understand nair, back air. I don't care how spicy of a Fox you are, ain't no way you're playing without those two moves, right? Like, literally impossible to play without those two moves. So even if you don't really quite get why certain things are strong, that's the whole point, right? You just try to emulate and you go through the motions and you're like, oh wow, this move is really safe. I can kind of do a back air then dash away like Light does, or I can back air in a spot dodge, or I can back air in a jump, right? There's so many different ways to reset. I also think when you start that process, you'll start understanding other aspects of the game. Okay, back air, pretty good horizontal space. Like, this is my left-right spacing move, right? Nair is my up-down cross-up move, right? You start getting these baseline concepts. Obviously, there's more depth to it, but you need to go through the motions to understand, like, wow, so why did I get punished for those? Why do I get punished for Nair and Light doesn't? Is Light crossing up? Is Light doing a hard Nair right before it hits the ground? Is he drifting away, right? What is X player doing that I'm not, because I'm doing the same move, but I'm getting punished? Am I doing soft Nair on the top of someone's shield so they have the most amount of frame advantage, so I'm getting, like, blown back with an up smash and losing my stock? Or am I crossing up, delaying, and all these other aspects, right? And even breaking things down in general concepts too. I think, just for me personally, I don't get to play the game as much, but when I do play the game, I always try to continue where I left off, right? Like, so one thing that I try to work on is my horizontal gameplay rather than my vertical, because I feel like I lean more towards my vertical. But you wouldn't even get to that point of understanding, oh, vertical, horizontal gameplay, unless you go through the motions and you see why you're losing tournaments or why you're losing stocks, right, and all these other things. So even kind of, and that's why I like Ramses's thing on taking notes, right? Whether it's mental notes or just writing it down on paper, I think paper is better because you can take it out of your brain and just put it on the paper and then reference back to it, right? But just little thoughts of reflecting on your gameplay. And this is something that me and Void do a lot. So one thing that me and Void do now that we didn't do back in Smash 4, it was just grind culture. I would go to do my construction job, I'd come back, Void, hot off the presses, 8 hours of training mode. I'm the guy that is the training dummy. Sit down, play with them for like 6 to 7 hours, go to sleep, rinse, repeat, right? And then, so like his days are, a lot of training mode and then playing when I get home. And we would just grind for hours. And then, dude, sometimes like we're grinding like 8+ hours. I'm just like getting shit on, two stocked. And it's like, there's a certain, I think, understanding the point where your brain is just mush. I don't know if you guys ever experienced this, where it's just straight exhaustion, right? Like you've been grinding and you're like locked in, focused, especially if you're playing someone that's more technical or just they generally beat you, right? Or at least this is how I am. I feel like I have to lock in even harder to try and attempt to keep up to get as much information. Because if the matches are close, I'm like, okay, this is working, this is not. If you're just getting shit on, it's just like, okay, well, this is just not working. And then it's literally everything. But then there's other the board. Right. But then there's factors, right? There's like, well, I'm making the right call, but fuck, he's just a little faster than me. Or fuck, he's just reacting a little quicker than me here, right? And even understanding that, you might not know whether it's right or wrong. And that's why I love the question from Alto, because there's some little niche things where it's like, doing the nair there is good, but you did a soft nair at the top of their shield, right? There's so many contexts, there's so much little micro situations where this move can work if you do it this way and you're drifting this direction, but if you do it this way and you do it too high or too early or you didn't cross up, you lose a stock or whatnot, right? So I think reflecting is something that me and Void started doing at the end of Smash 4 after I moved to California with him. So we would play an hour and we would kind of cap out our time. We would be like, okay, we play, and then me and him just got busier and stuff too, right? So it's like, hey, whenever we grind Smash, we play for an hour, we talk with each other for like 5 to 15 minutes, reflect on the match, just talk about, oh, hey, like, what did you feel like you were doing good? What did you feel like you were taking advantage of my play? And just kind of go back and forth and reflect on it, so that 1 hour and just that like 15-minute reflection might be more valuable than you grinding for 7 hours, because after 2 hours, your brain's mush. Right? Yeah, especially, and this scenario would happen a lot too. It's like, okay, I get home from working 8 hours of hard labor construction, and then I sit down and I play Void, right? I would say after about 2 or 3 hours, I would say my stamina for playing video games, even after physical exhaustion, is higher than normal, because I've been doing hard labor my entire life and playing video games, so that kind of goes hand in hand for me. But there is still a certain point where I'm just like playing someone that's a lot better at the game, a lot more practice at the game, right? And then I do a whole day of construction work, come back, and then after about 2 hours, my brain's kind of 2-3 hours, my brain's mush, right? It's like I'm going through the motion subconsciously, which is great, but I'm not retaining anything. And I think understanding that breaking point is super important for players, especially Smashers, because I think for Smashers, the culture is like, yo, stay up till like 4 a.m., play Smash, then go to sleep, wake up, get to my noon pool, and then play, right? It's just like general Smash culture, and I think it's not uncommon in video game culture too, right? Just like staying up really late and playing video games, I think, is a general video game culture thing. But I think for Smash, if you're trying to manage your time, you want to understand when there's a certain tipping point where you're not really getting much out of it. And instead of playing for 2 hours, you can play for 1 hour, reflect for 10 minutes with whoever you're playing with. And that's great too, because you get to see their learning curve and their learning process of the theory, yourself as well. And then if you still have more time, say you have 45 minutes left, you can watch some top level players, or you can watch some top level VODs, or even some local level VODs with said friend, right? And just watch it. And for me, this is where I feel like I got a lot of my knowledge about the game, as well as just through commentary, just watching a match and talking about it with someone else. And especially in Smash 4, when my commentary style, it was more technical. I kind of drifted away from that. I didn't want to be like the frame data guy, right? I just wanted to be someone that knew a lot about the game. But in Smash 4, I would always bust out frame data and like talk to the other person. Like a lot of times it would be like other SoCal casters like Bam or Strides, and just be like, oh wow, it's interesting how they're approaching this matchup. This move is frame X, and it's minus this, and these are their options, but they're choosing to do this, which is interesting, and yada yada yada. So like having those types of conversations, and I feel like I just generally do that a lot with friends, but also when commentating, you do that as well. So I feel like I've had a lot of time, and I feel like that's where most of my knowledge comes from, is just really picking the brains of other character specialists. When you play one character, or even if you play 5 characters, there's a lot more than 5. So even if you have this crazy deep understanding of them, there's always someone out there in Smash, in the world of Smash, that knows more about a specific character, or a specific stage, or a specific tech. Like, there's no way you can know even 50% of the knowledge in Smash. It's just too much. So conversating, community discords, going to your locals, talking about the game, I think can help you a lot. And again, just making sure you retain the value of your practice sessions by reflecting. And even if you have to break it up as well, right? If you break it up in like 30-minute segments and stuff like that, that can help a lot. So it's like, oh, play for 30 minutes, reflect for 5, play for that, and you just find out what works for you. But I think reflecting on what you just did is super important, because generally when you're playing, like, there are some thoughts that go through your head, but you mainly want it to be just like no thoughts in your head and you're just executing, right? And then you reflect after to change then you reflect consciously to affect the subconscious. Then you keep going through the cycle. Reflect consciously, and then you try to transfer that to your subconscious. Reflect consciously, then you try to reflect that into your subconscious, right? So that's the kind of process. Yeah, and then you go to bed, which will solidify it more into your subconscious, right? So sleep is also very important.
Nice.
I also specifically just wanted to make a quick note. So one of the important things about the Void situation, which to be fair, he has proven is a skill that he transfers over to every game, is that specifically that context of him in that scenario is early Smash 4. So
yeah,
when you are in early Smash 4, your there's a lot smaller amount of players to emulate, and it's a lot more likely that people are actually not playing something correctly, just because they are introducing and certain things that become standard later, like perfect pivoting, for example, are not being implemented yet. So it's a lot more likely
for innovation, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to make that point.
Smaller player pool is a huge factor. Tech was more prevalent in Smash 4. Like I said, there's not a lot of secret weapons in Ultimate. Like the game, and I think that's what Nintendo wanted. They didn't want the game to have like technical barriers. So, and also the player pool is just crazy bigger in Ultimate. To emulate what Void did in the beginning of Ultimate instead of the beginning of Smash 4 would have been, the chances of it happening would have been way less likely. And that even snowballs even more if we get another Smash game, right? Because the player base for the next Smash game is going to be even crazier than Ultimate. So, or I'm assuming so. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what next question do we have?
I actually wanted to add a final thing to this topic as well, which is I think it's also important to think about who you're practicing with, in terms of like, so what Charles said that I think is very important to just dive into a little bit deeper is that if you play against someone who's like a lot better than you, you just don't know what's going on. You just get bodied and you just don't retain any information because you have to reflect a lot on what is even happening in the first place. And it just becomes really hard to know what to do. And so generally you can kind of divide it into three kind of categories. There's players that you beat, players that you're generally even against, and players that you lose to. And generally you want to play against a little bit of every category. Against players that you normally beat, you can do a lot of integration, right? You can do a lot of experimentation. Against people that you normally lose against, you can learn a lot of theory, you can learn a lot of new things about the game. And against players that you're even against, you get a more realistic view of where you're at. And so if you have the privilege, having a wide range of opponents that you can face is a very, very nice thing to have. So keep that in mind. I know there are players that, you know, that only play against a specific type of opponent. Like they only play against people that they're better against. For example, like imagine like you get started with Smash because of a friend, and then you start playing with them, and they've been playing for like years now, and then you just get bodied all the time. That is frustrating. It is not your fault if that is frustrating. And similarly, like let's say you're in a region where everyone is weaker than you. Well, that means that you're going to mostly be like implementing things, but like how are you going to learn new theory if no one is really showing you what you're doing wrong? And so if you don't have access to a wide range of skill levels, you're going to have to think about how to compensate for that. So something that I talked about with Gluttony just after lockdown ended was exactly this. Because at the time, Gluto was just destroying Europe, right? He still does really well in Europe, but now people can challenge him way more, like Bloom and Siski and Crepsole. But back then, he just won everything without even trying.
Especially in Smash 4, he was winning with Wario. Yeah, that's an issue.
Yeah. Smash 4 was a little bit different. Hey, Europe got better.
I had to call you guys out, man. I had to do it.
Yeah, I know.
You guys' production's looking too good, man. I gotta go back in the past, man. Hold up.
I've been to America. I now see the truth of the matter.
The truth of the matter.
It's all good. But I remember talking to Pluto, and I specifically told him, like, okay, well, if no one in Europe can show you what you're doing wrong, then you have to know the various outcomes of your decision yourself, right? You have to like kind of develop that theory yourself if no one can show it to you. And so similarly, if you have no one to kind of like beat up, right? You have no one below your skill level, you're gonna maybe have to spend more time in training mode or playing CPUs or playing Elite Smash. And so trying to figure out how you can compensate for what you don't have, and also tapping into what you do have, right? Like Bam said, talking to people, using all of these resources available to you, really, really important, really conducive to good practice. So that is my final spiel on the practice topic.
Yeah, and
Anyone
honestly,
else want to add something?
we went so long. I feel like we can just do final thoughts and end the episode here, and then we can answer the rest of the questions on the next episode. So as you guys can see, sometimes if the question has enough depth, we will go an entire episode on it. So I thought the question was great. I thought the topic was great. I think my final closing statements is just some funny stories. So obviously there was when me and Void would practice, there's a huge execution barrier like gap, right? So one thing we would actually do to compensate for that is if I missed the confirm, I would tell Void to run off the stage. I'd be like, a top player would hit that.
With the Luigi.
I was like, if you went to the main line and you played someone in a tournament, like that Fox player hits that Nair up smash every time. I suck, so that's fine, but you have to run off the stage because you would have got it. Like, and you would do it, dude.
Give me the benefit of the doubt.
I'm like, dude, I can't execute like that right now because I.
But you're dead.
But you're like realistically, you're dead. And then I would play other characters, and if I would grab him with Luigi at 0, I'd grab him, and then I'll just release him and be like, all right, run off. Like you're dead. I wouldn't even try to do the combo. I'd be like, in real life though, like if you're at a tournament, you're dead there. So
in real life, you're dead.
Yeah, in the real, we're in Hawaii right now.
Con killed you right now.
Yeah, Con just obliterated your stock. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead.
That's insane.
Con.
Dude, Apex 2015, Luigi, you would die off of a grab, like legit.
Yeah.
And there was Luigis out there that did that. So
I mean, to be fair, that was still happening at the end of the game.
True. In different ways. Yeah. Well, and then like the pre-patch fireball was crazy. Like Luigi's neutral was actually nuts. Like release of Smash 4.
Fireball.
Yes, the fireball.
Yeah, that fireball was crazy.
But yeah,
I remember Larry Luigi. I go back that far.
Larry's Luigi and DK. You knew the character was getting nerfs as Larry was picking them up. Like just pretty much. But yeah, I mean, just a fun story. Just to kind of cap off this episode, I think going over all of these techniques is super important. I hope you learned a lot. I mean, Bam, Tony, do you guys have any final statements on practice?
Yeah,
talking about practice.
Practice. Yeah, man. Also, I know we talked about. Tony made a great point about the sustainability, right? And we've all talked about how playing for 8 hours a day or whatever that is very, very abnormal, and that usually doesn't last, right? And yeah, it's something finding a way to like. Practicing for X amount of hours can be really hard. So I think not only is it about finding that right sweet spot in terms of the amount of hours, but also finding a way to make sure that it's still relatively enjoyable to you, right? And it's still feeding into that kind of passion side. That fuel will lead you very, very far. I'll tell you guys right now for anything again. And I love to compare how these things relate to a lot of life skills as well, right? Like practice is a very powerful life skill, right? To learn how to practice, to learn how to learn, to break down these processes is very huge. And again, one of the things is also like how do you keep yourself maintained so that you can continue to do this practice and not just burn out over practice? Because there's a lot of people that do. There are a lot of people that say they want to do this and that, and then they practice, and they maybe for the first. See me in the first 2 weeks, I'm like, God, I'm playing fucking 80 hours a week. I don't care. I'm doing all this, that, and the third. Yep, I'm alpha. I'm just, I'm great. And then it's like week 3, it's like, you get a control in your hand, you're like, okay, I don't know, man.
You burn out.
I can't.
Yeah, man. I can't do it. I
can't
do it.
I can't.
You play for 30 minutes.
I hate this game.
So someone hits you off stage, you're like, nah, I'm good. And then lo and behold, you're gone. Just like that, instant. All right. So you also have to sustainability is very because the thing about sustainability is this, right? You're just gonna be in better spirits, but also most importantly, if you aren't in the field, if you are not there on the court doing the damn thing, you can never ever hope to become better, right? You have to be in the ring to do so, right? You have to be there in actually doing it. If you're not playing the game, if you're off somewhere else because you burned out or whatever, you're never gonna prove, right? And so it's how do I keep myself at least in it, right? In the thick of it, in being passionate about it, playing the game, watching the game, talking to people about the game. How can I make that sustainable? Because the longer you're doing that, the more likelihood you're going to be in a place where you are going to improve. Now, some people like to go and think that's all they need to do. I just need to be in it. And you know what? I just need to play the game. And especially this is a big thing. Granted, I understand from everyone else why this happens, because Smash has a terrible training mode, so it is very easy to get in this habit. But this is a very big habit for a lot of Smashers. If they talk about training and their training result revolves about them just playing people over and over and over and over and over and over again, and there's no thought process behind it. There's no reflecting. There's no evaluation. Nothing. Right? It is. I'm just going to continue playing someone for hours, and I walk away and said, "Oh yeah, maybe I got better."
Once I hit X amount of hours, I will win.
Yeah. Well, like
No.
it magically happens, right? Like this is not an RPG. You don't just magically just like boop. Oh, you know what? You hit the cap, baby. It's time. Pick your new skill. Pick your new class. No, it's not how it goes, bro. That's not how it goes. All right, you guys gotta actually put in a time and really like thoughtful, like intentional practice, and that'll go a long way. But like, yes, you have to be in it. In the very like foundationally, you need to be in it to even get to that point. So. Those are my final thoughts.
So something that people need to keep in mind is that, especially with most modern FGC games and most modern like speedrunning games and such, a lot of the game is going to come down to set play, or essentially turning the game into single player scenarios where it's up to you to determine the outcome of the rest of the what's about to come. And so when that happens, how well things pan out are almost entirely within your control. And so what we can then do is treat this like a purely single player game and practice it like a purely single player game as a result. And so I would say that both in very early and very late scenarios of the game, one of the most important things you can do in practice is just practice your set play. Essentially rehearse playing a match and look at your matches so that you are specifically looking for, well, what notes do I need to take back into my rehearsal so that I can readjust and then rehearse doing it correctly, the way it should have been, with correct being defined as, well, what is the best version of this set play? What does this look like to me? And then how can I create that? And then rehearse playing it perfectly. And I believe this is typically shared as an idiom of perfect practice leads to perfect results, or something of that nature. It's not entirely true, but that is the essence behind it. So go ahead and focus on the situations, especially if you have less time in the day. Go ahead and focus on the situations that are closest to being in your control. And even if they're not 100%, they can be near 90%. So using Luigi as an example, can the opponent SDI Luigi combos? Yes. But most of what happens from the moment Luigi grabs you in Ultimate, it is probably in the Luigi player's controller that's going to determine the rest of that result. So you go ahead and you focus on your component of that equation because it's going to be mostly in your favor in the first place. So play those situations, play situations like responding to the opponent on the ledge. It doesn't matter. These are universal things. It doesn't matter who you're grabbing. MK Leo gets hit by Luigi combos just the same as Jimmy Lou Who down the street. So go ahead, play them. Obviously, if you have tools that allow you to modify SDI or change behavior, or even if you just have a friend or a neighbor who's cool with picking up the controller and helping you mix up DI and SDI. These are all valid solutions and can simulate you essentially playing that. And then you play the match, you play real opponents. If that doesn't go according to your schedule, then you reflect, as he was mentioning, and you determine, well, what was he doing that's different from my rehearsal? And can I include that difference into my rehearsal? Let's say you're only practicing Luigi combos against DI and SDI away, and then you play someone, you can't combo them at all because they're always DIing or SDIing behind you. Then go ahead and practice both directions. Practice reacting to both directions. You have successfully upgraded as a player. You're now ready for an entire class of scenario under what is usually under your control. And then you play again. This time, if everything's still falling within your rehearsal, just keep practicing it. Keep doing what works until you find somebody who finds either a way to give you a new DI pattern that you struggle with, or you go ahead and find someone who finds an entirely different way to play the game and avoid the grabs in the first place, in which case then you have something to actually learn from. But in the meantime, focus on what's in your control, maximize that, and honestly, just stay consistent in practicing that. Just, again, a little bit a day, preferably, again, doing it so that you are remembering key concepts before you go to bed so that it can crystallize during your sleep. Another important time that you can practice is if you have difficulty finding motivation, look for the points in your day in which you have the most energy. For me personally, when I wake up in the mornings, that's usually when I have the most energy, the most willpower to do whatever I'm going to find difficult to do. And so the first things I do every day are the things I want to do the least, as a rule of thumb. And then the things that I want to learn the most or recall the most for the day are the things I do just before I decide to go to bed and fall asleep. So that is my advice to you. And in this particular case, you can do both. I personally, if I were a competing player, I would practice in the morning when I first wake up, and then the last thing I would do is practice just before I go to bed. Probably, again, reflecting on that previous day so that I would essentially recall and integrate what I want to do when I wake up in the morning. And then the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is act on those things that kind of crystallize through my sleep. So that's my final input on that.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Again, if you guys want to directly support us, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you think is the best technique for practice or the most important aspect of it. And of course, if you guys want to support us even more, you can ask us questions directly by subscribing to our Discord. So you can go ahead and do that. Link to the Discord will be in the description below. But until next time, class dismissed.